Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to church. My name is Lynn Lawson. I'm a lay person, and on the fourth Sunday of each month in this church we have a lay Sunday, meaning that the service is led by a lay person. And today I'll lead the service along with Kalanani Gallus, who will give the sermon. I'm going to say something about Kalanani here, even though she's going to be speaking later. Even though Kalanani is an active member of our community, she's a quiet member, and many of us don't know much about her. So I'll tell you something. Kalanani taught for more than 30 years in urban, suburban, and rural public schools, as well as graduate schools. She holds a master's degree in early childhood education and a doctorate in humanistic education. As a teacher-researcher, Kalanani published extensively in the fields of language, culture, and literacy. Upon leaving education, she studied marriage and family counseling at Pacifica Graduate Institute and received a master's degree in depth psychology.
Good morning, you made it.
She has worked with children, families, and individuals as a grief counselor and psychotherapist. Kalanani began practicing yoga in 1998, trained to be a yoga teacher in 2010, and has been teaching yoga in Peacham ever since. We're glad to have you here. Our annual St. Francis Blessing of the Animals will be part of the service next Sunday, October 2nd. Bring your leashed or caged companions or a photo to receive a blessing from our minister. There will also be a blessing for pets who have gone from this life. If your animal is too large or unruly to attend indoors, you can meet Reverend Sonia outside the building after the service at 10:45. And because of the St. Francis service next Sunday, we'll hold communion on October 10th instead. October 9th. Are there other announcements that didn't make it into the bulletin? Yes, John.
The church council, which is the church's board of directors, meets quarterly, but the bylaws call for the formation of a working group that's bigger than council members, that meets between council meetings to tell everybody what's going on in the church and coordinate. I'm supposed to get that going earlier this year. I'm planning to get it going Wednesday morning, either here or at the cafe at 8:30. Anyone's welcome to attend. It's bigger than just council members. So 8:30 on Wednesday.
Okay, so for people on Zoom, welcome. John gave an announcement about a sort of larger than council meeting that's open to all, and it's going to be held Wednesday morning, 8:30, did you say, John?
Yes.
8:30 at the cafe.
Or here, depending on availability.
I didn't hear that.
It could be here if it's too crowded.
If there's too many, it will be held here in the church. That's this Wednesday morning. Any other announcements? Okay, let's begin our time of worship with a prelude. call to worship this morning, I'm going to read from this book called How Yoga Works, which I've mentioned in this church before. I'm going to read a passage. The reference is in your bulletin. Publishing information. The passage that I'm going to read is a conversation between a yoga teacher and her student, who is a captain of police at a police station. And the teacher is explaining the importance of daily yoga practice, not skipping a section. The captain turned and gazed out the window. Compassion? What's that supposed to mean? How would compassion stop me from skipping my yoga practice? It's something you have to understand, I said quietly. It's something important. You see, you can't do this. You can't do yoga just to fix your own back. It's too small. We are too small. If we do something just to help ourselves, it will never work. You can never really put effort into a thing if it's only for yourself. It has to be for something bigger. Look at the way a woman will work for her children. Look at the work they can do, 24 hours a day, day in and day out for 10, 20 years. They can do it for only one reason, because they're not doing it only for themselves. They're doing it for others too. The captain laughed. So you want me to do my yoga for other people too? Something like that, I said. All you really have to do is think about helping some other people with what you learn. If I taught you all this yoga and suddenly your back got better and you were walking around with a big smile on your face all the time, would it do anything, say, for the corporal? For the corporal? The captain smiled. I don't know. It would take a lot to get him to do anything. He never has any energy. He never gets excited about anything. Could yoga do anything for him? It does a lot of things, I replied. A lot of things you can hardly guess. But yes, certainly, it would change his life. Now that he knows you started yoga, he'll wait and see if it helps you. If it obviously does, then we could get him to fix himself. And so you see, if you have compassion, if you keep thinking that if you fix your back, you might also be fixing the corporal, then when a day comes that you feel like skipping your practice, you won't, because you'd be hurting him, you see. The captain mulled this over, but I could see the idea might not be clear enough in his heart to work. And just then, the door to his office burst open, and there was the sergeant, panting for breath, his face red and contorted from his liquor. He stood there stupidly, weaving in the doorway, leering at the two of us. That too, said the captain to me quietly. Same thing, I replied. He nodded. I won't forget. Let's worship with singing. We'll sing hymn number 7. I'll read the first verse. Bruce will play it all the way through, and we'll sing all the verses. This hymn was a favorite of George Kempton, a longtime member of this church, and many of you remember him. He and Bob Fuhrer used to take very good care of our meeting house. Joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love. Hearts unfold like flowers before thee, opening to the sun above. Melt the clouds of sin and sadness, drive the dark of doubt away. Giver of immortal gladness, fill us with the light of day. Hymn number 7. concerns, and celebrations.
Morning. Now is the time to call to mind people in our congregation, in our community of friends and neighbors, in our families who are struggling with life right now. Do you know anyone that would like to know that our congregation is thinking of them? Please tell us their names. Yes.
I had a message from Sonia this morning from her friend Sarah. She says her pain level and pain meds are down and her energy is up. Her spirits are good. Please continue to pray for her. She has 3 more intense chemo treatments spaced 3 weeks apart. It will feel like a long fall for her. She thanks everyone for their prayers.
Thank you, Patty. I have listed Dakota, an 18-year-old that's a friend of Bill Bundy's, who is suffering from lymphoma. Then Hattie Fresher is still ill. Paul and Peg both are suffering. And a friend of Rick's by the name of Butch is also in our prayers. Anyone else? Oh, I'm sorry, Bruce.
Well, I just wanted to, for people who don't know, Cecilia Kane is moving over the great waters to Atlanta this week. And Cecilia's a wonderful friend and bringing us her a lot. I know she's going to try to come back and teach in the summer. I think we should all pray for a safe and journey and good time with her family down there.
Thank you, Bruce. Let's have a moment of silence to honor these friends. Oh, I'm sorry.
I have celebration tomorrow. Sarah Fitzhugh and Carolyn Deasy. It's their birthday tomorrow.
Anyone else? Let's have a moment of silence to honor these friends of courage. Please pray with me the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
Thank you, Mary. The responsive reading, which is in your bulletin, is a poem by Jalaluddin Rumi, a Sufi Muslim poet, well-beloved and well-known. The poem is called The Guest House. This being human is a guest house.
Every morning in the real.
A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor.
Welcome and entertain them all.
Even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture, still treat each guest honorably.
He may be clearing you out for some new delight.
The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in.
Be grateful to whoever comes.
Because each has been sent as a guide from beyond.
O God, give me a heart that I might pour out in thanksgiving. Give me life that I can spend it working for the salvation of the world.
Oh God, give me a heart that I God bless our steadfast support for this church and make us wise stewards of these gifts. Amen. Let's sing hymn number 402. We'll sing all the verses, but I'll read the second verse. From every ailment flesh endures, our bodies clamor to be free. Yet in our hearts we would confess that wholeness is our deepest need. Number 402. The scriptural selection is from 1 Corinthians. This is a familiar verse to many of you. I'm going to read the translation from the Amplified Bible. The Amplified Bible is an annotated Bible translation, meaning that the translators inserted into the original text phrases that they felt would clarify the meaning for the modern reader. From 1 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love for others growing out of God's love for me, then I have become only a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal, just an annoying distraction. And if I have the gift of prophecy and speak a new message from God to the people, and understand all mysteries and possess all knowledge, and if I have all sufficient faith so that I can remove mountains, but do not have love reaching out to others, I am nothing. If I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but do not have love, it does me no good at all. Love endures with patience and serenity. Love is kind and thoughtful and is not jealous or envious. Love does not brag and is not proud or arrogant. It's not rude. It's not self-seeking. It is not provoked nor overly sensitive and easily angered. It does not take into account a wrong endured. Love bears all things, regardless of what comes, believes all things, looking for the best in each one, hopes all things, remaining steadfast during difficult times, endures all things without weakening. Love never fails. It never fades nor ends. As for prophecies, they will pass away. As for tongues, they will cease. As for the gift of special knowledge, it will pass away. And now there remain faith, hope, love, these three, the choicest graces. But the greatest of these is love. May these ancient words enter our ears, settle into our hearts, and dwell there evermore. Kalanani.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. You make it possible for me to see. I can't see you then very well, but I can see the text. The Guest House by Jalaluddin Rumi. This being human is a guest house. Every morning a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your home empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight, the dark thought, the shame, the malice. Meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. I open with this poem because it expresses so well the universal challenge of being human. Most, if not all, spiritual traditions are there to support that challenge, to try to help us along the way. And yoga is a practice that foregrounds this human dilemma as a starting point. So this morning I'll give you a very brief, we'll skim over the top of yoga, and obviously there's a lot more than I can say this morning. So I'll give you a little brief history of what we know about the origins of yoga, and then I'll go through some of what I consider to be the most important starting points for understanding it. Scholars believe that yoga originated in the Indus Valley, and there's some dispute over how many years ago, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 years ago. It's one of the earliest, you might say, practices that was organized to relieve human suffering. At first, it was reserved just for ascetics, for the sadhus, people who were separate from society. And that happened for quite a while, in around 1,000, again, we're very vague, 2000 BCE. The teachings began to be distributed and written down so that other people like you and I, householders, could begin to take advantage of some of the practices. In about 200 to 300 BCE, Patanjali wrote down the Yoga Sutras, which Lynn has brought to you through how yoga works. That is a novel that takes many of the sutras and uses them as part of a narrative to really explain how yoga works. And it's important to emphasize here that yoga was originally intended to be a preparation for meditation. And we could put that in a modern context by saying preparation for meditation, but in reality, preparation for prayer, for reflection, for contemplation. That was the original purpose of yoga, and still remains to this day. And so, I'll give you some important caveats. Yoga is not a religion. It's not a religion. It doesn't have a church, it doesn't have a dogma, doesn't have formal clergy or rules of membership. That's not to say that it doesn't have important teachers. And there are many, many branches of yoga. But it is not a religion in a formal sense. It's described to yogis as the science of self-realization. And so you might say, well, science, how could it be science? And we'll look at a little bit at that a little bit later. And it can also be, though, a spiritual practice that offers a framework for spiritual growth. And it's important to emphasize that point that yoga is not a religion, because many, many people who are misinformed believe that it is, and that results in really fear. So when yoga enters schools, as it's doing, there can be uproar about that. That should not be in schools, separation of church and state. And so that is an important thing for us to understand. It's not a religion. However, for committed yoga practitioners, it can offer a spiritual path. But that path has an important difference with those of Western religions. First is the question of divinity. In classical yoga, God is embodied in each of us. God is not outside of us. I often say that we are divine beings in a human container. Divine beings in a human container. Sometimes you see the phrase God in a box. We being in a box. So the divine in yoga is not a male or a female presence, but embodies both the masculine and the feminine. In classical yoga, divine energy is manifested in every aspect of the natural world, every aspect without exception. And we say that if a negative connotation comes to some of the things that are in our environment, that is not because of the divine nature of it, it's because of the overlay that humans put on it. And Joseph Campbell has described for you maybe a little bit more of the difference between Western and yoga as an Eastern spiritual tradition. And I quote from him now. In the Western sphere, in terms of the Orthodox traditions, God is a person, the person who has created this world. God and his creation are not of the same substance. Ontologically, they are separate and apart. We therefore do not find in the religions of the West, as we do in those of the East, mythologies and disciplines devoted to the yielding of an experience of one's identity with the divine. And he's basically just reiterating the point that for yogis who practice within the context of yoga, the divine is embodied here, everywhere. In this sense, every child who is born is inherently divine, luminous, and clear-seeing. That is the starting point. What happens to follow that up? How could that happen? And why aren't we all so fabulously fabulous? Well, life happens. And gradually that luminousness is overlaid with our life histories, which probably from the moment we are taken home, or even before that for some children. We know that even for some children, even in the womb, life happens. Things are laid over. Patterns are laid in by families, by life experiences, some good, some bad. It's important here to clarify that point as part of yoga, but also to clarify that in yoga teaching, there are many, many teachers who will not conform to that sense of divinity. That's not part of what they do. It's also important to point out that in yoga classes, this is not an expectation that when you come, you will accept this. you're going to accept this concept. Some students who attend yoga classes are members of many different religious communities: Protestants, Catholics, Jews, Buddhists, Muslims, Jainists, Baha'i, you name it. They come to yoga, and we'll explain how that sometimes happens. Other students would say that they have no commitment to organized religion, and as you know from what we're hearing in our society now, that number are getting to be larger than the rest. Few senses that they want to belong to a religious community. Does that mean that those folks don't seek spiritual sustenance? That they don't seek transcendence or wholeness, as the hymn just sang to? In my experience, it doesn't mean that. Second important point, very important, yoga is not a competitive sport. And you can laugh. But some people come into yoga with a background as a competitive athlete, very, very talented competitive athlete, and they bring that with them. And that can be actually in yoga class kind of dangerous. I can't talk about the dangers of that, but if you're looking at the person next to you who may have been practicing yoga for a long time and doesn't look as fit as you are, and you try to do what they do, you could hurt yourself. Some people are nodding because they have been in yoga classes. Statistics from 2016, and that's the latest I think they projected that by this year, there would be over 300 million yoga practitioners in the world. In the United States, as of 2016, yoga was practiced by around 36 million Americans on a regular basis. So yoga, we could say yoga, I think the statistics I found, is now performed by 1 out of 10 Americans, making the United States one of the most popular countries for yoga practice. And there are statistics that show that even though yoga originated in the Indus Valley and in the area of India, there are more practitioners in the United States of yoga than those in India. So you kind of see there's a shifts our understanding of what's happening. So why do people come to yoga? The predominant reason is for stress reduction. Stress reduction. And that's, you can probably see why more and more people are coming. Yeah. In the United States, as of 2016, let's see. So if I look at statistics here, there are people who come because they're physical therapists or trainers who recommend that they come to yoga to avoid injury or to heal injury. Many people come because they want to be more flexible and stronger. That's very common. The bottom line is that in this society is that most people come because they want to be more healthy. They want to be more functioning in their life, and that's a really good thing. So what does the word yoga in Sanskrit mean? It means to yoke or to join. And what are we joining or yoking to? In classical Hatha Yoga, which is what I teach, we seek to unify all the parts of ourselves, body, mind, emotions, spirit, and soul, into a realized whole. And as I said, the working definition of yoga as a practice is self-realization. So the portal of self-care, wanting to be healthier, provides the perfect avenue for the practice of yoga. So this talk I labeled yoga as an ecumenical toolbox. And we could begin to open the toolbox here and think about what's inside the box. What does spiritual growth have to do with going to a yoga class once or twice a week? What are the tools that yoga offers? Most people believe and come to yoga because they think it's an exercise regime. That's why they come. You do poses on a mat or in a chair, and you breathe, and that's yoga. In fact, yoga follows what's called an eight-limb path, and in the Yoga Sutras, that was where it began to be laid out more clearly. Each limb offers support for spiritual growth. Poses that are done in a mat or in a chair, probably those that you're very familiar with, are called asana. That's one of the limbs of yoga. Breath work is called Pranayama. That's a second limb. And those are usually two linked in the physical aspect of yoga. There are ethical principles in what are called the yamas and the niyamas. The yamas are 5 in number, and they're meant to give guidance for our interpersonal relationship with the world. The niyamas, also 5, offer structures and practices to support that improving of our relationship with the world. And I'll give brief examples of both. I think most of us in this country will be familiar with the use of nonviolent resistance by Martin Luther King and the movement for racial equality in the country. Martin Luther King adopted that technique, that philosophy from Mahatma Gandhi, who was a yogi and who led the struggle for freedom from India. And the proper name for that yama is ahimsa, or non-harming. The adaptation into this country, I think we all are familiar with the effect that had on people who were struggling against great forces and somehow or other resisting the desire to fight back. So ahimsa is non-harming. And basically, it starts with the self. All of the yamas start with the self. We practice non-harming, we begin by ourselves. I always say in yoga in a class, if you're saying mean things about yourself, because you can't do this pose or that pose, you need to remember the yama of the ahimsa. You're bad talking yourself. That's not a good thing. So that's the very basic premise of non-harming, is that we begin always with the self. We can't beat up ourselves all the time and then expect that we can be really kind and solicitous and compassionate with other people. The niyama I'll bring to you is svadhyaya. In the Sanskrit, svadhyaya, it means self-study. It asks the yogi to consider how life patterns and conditioning cloud our ability to relate honestly to ourselves and others. And you recall here that a basic principle of yoga is that each individual enters the world with illumination and clarity and divinity inside of them. So Svadhyaya says, you got to begin to pay attention and uncover the things which are pushing that realization down. And so we begin on the yoga mat with Svadhyaya, self-study. Simple questions. How are you feeling in this pose? Is there a way you could adjust it? So it begins with the physical body, the muscles and the tendons and the bones and the ligaments. And you say, so how does that pose feel? Is there a way you can change it? And so we start to have that sense of self-study in a very broad way. And then gradually, as a yogi practitioner might continue, it moves on to states of mind. I might say at the beginning of the practice, what have you brought with you this morning? What are you bringing from the outside world that maybe is weighing you down, is on your shoulders? So we ask for a little reflection there. And then I ask if they could just put it aside for an hour so they can have some time alone with themselves. And so right now we'll just dig a little deeper into a yoga practice. Why do I keep using the word practice instead of class? And that's because a basic tenet on the yoga mat or in the chair is how we are in the mat is also how we are in our life off the mat. We just bring ourselves in with us, and then the we that we bring in leaves, perhaps changed, perhaps not. When, for example, a student feels angry or annoyed with him or herself, or sometimes with me, for asking them to do a particular pose, and then they can't do the pose, they don't like the pose, it's being held too long. That's a reflection of how they are in their lives. People come to know that because it's something that they're reminded of. What is asked at that point is, can you calm that emotion? Can you usually use the breath to calm that emotion, find a way to cope with that emotion? So basically the principle is that interactions that begin in class are taken off the mat. So when you leave the mat, my hope is always that people leave feeling a little bit more peaceful, a little bit more relaxed, and that maybe whatever they brought with them, it's not gnawing at them anymore. It's not as difficult as it was. Contrastingly, if you have a student who likes to push hard, likes to be the best, and comes into a yoga class and finds that they can't, in the practice, do what they think they can do, we begin to learn a little bit of humility. Take that off the net. Maybe I can't be best all the time. So we'll return now to Patanjali just for a moment. One of the most important sutras that Patanjali put down is the second Yoga Sutra. And that sutra, translated, says, yoga calms and quiets the fluctuation of the mind. Yoga calms and quiets the fluctuations of the mind. That's the deepest principle of how yoga works, as the book title says. And so you could say, well, how the heck does that happen? You're moving, you're doing exercise, you're doing poses. How could that happen that it calms and quiets the mind? So let's start just for a moment with the first thing that usually happens in a yoga class, which is you walk in, you sit in your chair, or you sit on a mat, and the teacher pretty much universally will say, let's make contact with the breath. And I will often say to my students, yoga is the breath. The yogis, as it developed over time, realized that to use the mind to calm the mind, it's really hard to have it work. So sometime in the development after Patanjali, it started to be that we use the breath to calm the mind. So what I'd like to do right now is just take less than a minute and have all of you for a moment do nothing, but notice not a special breath, just to take a moment to pay attention to your breath. Natural breath, what comes in, what goes out. What happens as soon as a group of people just starts to pay attention to their natural breath is what just happened here. The eyes turn down, many of them close. There's like the body settles, and that happens in the beginning of most yoga practices. It's as if this deep silence comes into the room. And that's the pathway. That's the pathway for yoga's effects to begin to work. Each of us right now is breathing, obviously, because we are alive and we're here, we're upright. And we know now that breath is central to everything. Science keeps proving more and more how breath centers contributes to the health of every possible system that we have going on in our bodies and our minds. Respiration, the exchange of oxygen. It's critical to our health. And in addition, science and research in psychology is showing that we can use the breath to ameliorate psychological states that are troubling us, that are making our life more difficult. And that's something that's taught in yoga classes, and now is taught in most mindfulness programs. So we begin with the breath, and as the class continues, we keep focusing on the breath. Inhale, exhale. So this is a constant reminder as you're moving through a pose, you're in a shape, just breathe. There are other limbs of yoga which I won't go into much today because it would take a long time. There are actually 8 limbs of yoga. And following breath work in pranayama, the limbs are related to moving more deeply into meditation. So the physical body is prepared, the mind is quieted, and then we move more deeply towards states of meditation that become increasingly more focused. So I won't say much about those today. There's a whole other discussion. But I'd like to close this morning by returning to the call to worship that Lynn used. When someone comes to me to ask about taking a yoga class or learning yoga, he or she will often say, I think it will be good for me, or, I have pain, and I think it might help with my pain. And the original motive for most people in coming to yoga is personal, as the captain was in the novel. It's personal. I got back pain. I'm sure this will help. They aren't really thinking about helping others, although there might be people who absolutely do that all the time. But that is not the motivation for coming in. But the regular practice of yoga benefits everyone in their personal sphere, because if I walk off from that, my we is a little bit different than the we I brought in. If I walk off the mat feeling better, I can certainly breathe. My breathing has freed up. My pain is a little bit ameliorated. Maybe the headache I brought in is gone. You know that when I walk back into my home or out into the community, it's my relationship with those people is going to be improved. So if you look at the toolbox and we look at the guest house, what we're trying to do is to support people who have the guest houses. All of us do. And at the end of every practice, we dedicate the resources that we might have gained in that hour or hour and a half. Those resources, we dedicate them to others. We send out the resources that we have gained just by breathing and moving and staying right on center. We send that out for other people to benefit from. And so what I know is that every one of my students comes to yoga to manage their guest house. They're just trying to manage the guest house. And I also know that everyone I meet in my life is also just trying to manage their guest house. We all do it in different ways. We have many different paths that we can choose. Some of those paths relieve our suffering, and for many people, unfortunately, the suffering is increased by the way they take to try and relieve the pressures and the challenges of the guest house. Everyone is on a continuum in this struggle, and everyone is on a different point. But regardless of the path chosen, for those who come to yoga, just a fairly simple practice. You breathe, you move, you take a shape. Perhaps you learn throughout the practice about the yamas and the niyamas. Those things filter in. What I know is that it can support and really improve people's lives and lessen the suffering. Thank you all.
Thank you, Kalanani. I know I have a much greater appreciation for how yoga can support our spiritual path. Let's sing hymn number 467. This hymn is an African American spiritual. The words are, I'm going to live so God can use me. And then you'll see at the bottom of the music, there are actually 4 verses. I'm going to live so God can use me, then I'm going to work, I'm going to pray, I'm going to sing. So the choir, Bruce will play it through, and the choir will lead us in this beautiful spiritual. Beloved seekers, go into your week keenly aware of the life and the love our Father, Mother, God has given you, and share the love with everyone that comes into your orbit. Amen.
Amen.